Frank Herbert's epic sci-fi magnum opus that was previously considered unfilmable. Well, in 1984, they filmed it anyway. Dune, 1984, is brought to us, oddly enough, by director David Lynch. In light of the fact that Denis Villeneuve is making his version of Dune next year, I thought now would be a good time to take a look back at the 1984 classic. Dune stars Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides, who is part of a royal family who is given reign over planet Arrakis in the year 10,191. Yeah, this shit's way out there. Arrakis is also known as Dune because the entire surface of the planet is desert. Now, why would someone want to rule over a harsh desert planet? Well, that's because Arrakis is the only place in the universe that you can find the spice melange. Spice, for short. The spice is a drug-like substance that has many different properties. Chief among those is that it's used by the Guild of Navigators for instant space travel, among many other things. In short, the spice is the shit. And he who controls Arrakis controls the spice, and he who controls the spice controls the universe. So this is a pretty big promotion by the Emperor to give the Atreides family rule over Arrakis. But there is some sly fuckery going on here. You see, the Emperor isn't too thrilled with House Arrakis because they've been gaining a lot of popularity amongst the people of the universe. The Emperor is scared that House Atreides is going to gain so much popularity and power that they may attempt to overthrow him. That and members of the Guild of Navigators, for short just the Guild, have foreseen that Paul will be the one to bring upon their demise. So the Emperor devises a sneaky-ass little plan where he kicks out Arrakis' current overlord, the Harkonnens, who just happen to be the mortal enemies of the Atreides, and gives the planet to House Atreides. How's that help him? It sounds like he's putting the person he's afraid of overthrowing him into an even greater seat of power. Well, it's because he wants to get them there to where they feel comfortable, and then he and the Harkonnens will come in, overthrow them, kill every one of them motherfuckers, and take Arrakis back. I know, it sounds a bit convoluted, and the book did a much better job of conveying this message than the movie. But this is what we got, so moving on. Fast forward, a bunch of shit happens, House Atreides is overthrown by the Harkonnens, and everyone in that bloodline is thought to be dead. However, Paul and his mother are actually not dead, they're just out in the middle of the desert, where over the course of a few years, they build and train an army to go and take back the planet from the Harkonnens. And that's the very basic version of what Dune is. Now, there's two versions of Dune you can watch. The theatrical cut, which is most readily available, and also the extended edition. I do not recommend watching the extended edition before the theatrical cut. Now, in this review, I will make a few references to the extended edition, but for the most part, I will be talking about the theatrical cut. Overall, the extended edition is really for fans of the original. If you start with this cut, you are going to be even more confused than you probably already will be with the theatrical version. It is extremely convoluted, and they cram in even more stuff than the theatrical version did. It's also missing a few small special effects from some of its added scenes, which do make those scenes seem a bit odd at times. I mean, it's nothing huge, but you gotta be a true fan of this movie to watch the extended version. It's not a very clean version. It's got some really odd editing and things of that nature that make it only for true fans of Dune. Dune's story is very deep. It's been some years since I read the book, and the book story is extremely intricate and very vast, which will be one of the reasons why a lot of people considered it unfilmable. It is a very deep, big, detailed book that has extremely expansive lore. And I will give David Lynch's Dune one thing, if nothing else. He did attempt to squeeze in a shit ton of the stuff from the book that typically would have been cut out. Now, that being said, the final product we got is so incomprehensible at times that really this is a great case study as to why things should be cut out of film adaptations sometimes. There's just too much here and not enough time to properly explain it all. So it comes across as extremely convoluted and really confusing. There is literally an encyclopedia that came with older versions of the movie so that you could stop and look things up because the movie sometimes just doesn't tell you what the fuck it's talking about. Hell, the newer version even comes with a little insert with little definitions to explain some of the things that are going to be said in the movie. And while that seems really odd, for anybody who knows David Lynch and his movies, it doesn't seem quite as odd. I'll go ahead and say it right now. Some people will hate me for saying this, but I am just not a fan of David Lynch's movies as a whole. There's a couple of them I do enjoy, but his style of filmmaking just doesn't jive with me. I have no problem with ambiguity, but it's It's as if Lynch's movies are just ambiguous just to be ambiguous. Like from beginning to end, in a lot of his movies, you have no fucking clue what's going on, and you need external sources to give you information that the movie doesn't so that you do know. Worst offender, in my opinion, would be Lost Highway. I'm not doing it. I've had this discussion with many people. There's no way, just given the information you're given in that fucking movie, that you can tell me what the fuck is going on. And no, you should not have to go somewhere else and look up what the fuck is going on in the movie. This information should be included in the movie that you are watching. That being said, the fact that there are parts of this movie that are just pretty incomprehensible and it seems like you're missing information isn't really that surprising given the director. I will say though that this is probably Lynch's most narratively coherent movie to date. Comparably speaking, he more or less stays in the lines while making this movie. This movie was critically panned upon its release, though over time it has gained a cult following. But it does still remain one of those movies that I think people either love it or hate it. Me myself, I've always had a bit of a soft spot in my heart for Dune. I absolutely recognize its shortcomings, but I still enjoy it regardless of those. And oh yes, it does have quite a few shortcomings. First of all, as mentioned earlier, there are times that it's almost incomprehensible. It is so convoluted as a whole that there are times when you're just wondering what the fuck exactly is going on. And there are plenty of times that you're wondering how the fuck did we get here? We were just there and now we're just over here. What happened? The movie spends an exuberant amount of time in the first half of the movie and the story. And I do appreciate that. They were trying to squeeze in as much of the information from the book as possible. Though that does mean that it takes quite a while to kick off the story of Dune. And while it does spend a whole lot of time leading up to the point where the Harkonnens come and overthrow Arrakis, everything after that, which is more of the meat of the story, is just flown through much quicker. They're touching on things, but that's it. It doesn't seem like nearly as much time and effort was put into the second half of the movie as the first half. The second half of the movie becomes a lot more action heavy, which is great because the action scenes and the effects in this movie are actually pretty cool, but it's as if story kind of took a back seat after about the halfway point of the movie. Even in the extended version, you would think that you get more, which they do add more to the second half of the movie in that version. It still moves along at a lightning pace after that middle point, which kind of baffles me because it seems like they were trying to cram in as much info from the book as possible. And there's so much in the second half of the book, the second part of this movie, that happens that is extremely relevant that they just glaze right over. It's just really weird. It's like they edited half the movie the way they wanted, and then they got to that halfway point and noticed, oh shit, we're on a deadline, we gotta get done, and just got it done real quick. This does make the second half of the movie even more confusing than the beginning half though. However, you do have these really big, cool action set pieces in the second half to keep you entertained, so it's a little bit easier to digest, I guess. Which brings me to something that this movie absolutely excels at, and that is its set design and scope. This is a big, expansive movie with some fantastic set design. Some great miniatures and matte paintings that really harken back to the DeVille epics of the 50s and 60s. And while there are some blue screen effects that are definitely showing their age, their epic grandness just cannot be denied, and they do have a certain charm about them. Something else that's really great about this movie is its absolutely awesome score by Toto. Regardless of what you think about the rest of the movie, you cannot deny that this is an awesomely epic 80s score for this movie. It is so 80s that the 80s called and demanded their fucking score back. There's also a hell of a cast in this thing, with the likes of Brad Dourif, Jürgen Prochnow, Patrick Stewart, Dean Stockwell, Max von Sydow, Sean Young, Sting, and many, many, many more. How they got all these big names together for this movie, I'll never know, but this cast is pretty fucking epic. What's not so epic though is the performances. Well, I guess that really depends on how you look at it. If you're a fan of David Lynch's movies and the performances in those movies, you'll probably be totally down with this. If not though, then you're gonna be scratching your head at how all these great actors are hamming it up so much on screen. Honestly, the way that this movie plays out, and as grand and over the top most of the performances are, it really felt like I was watching a more serious version of the 1980s Flash Gordon. Yes, it's that bad. Or good, depending on who you are, I guess. I actually kind of like Flash Gordon. And if they're not being big big and grand and over the top, then they are just so subdued and have these real long David Lynch pauses between speaking. It's just like every interaction is super weird and awkward. And then there's the internal monologuing. Internal thoughts in a book are a normal occurrence, and they work on the page. In a movie, they typically find a way for the character to vocalize or show what it is they're thinking for us, the audience. But not in Dune. No, here they just said, let's do it just like in the book, and we'll just hear their thoughts. And if that happened once or twice with something like really key, okay, that's cool. But I really think that this movie has more, or at least the same amount of internal monologuing than it does traditional dialogue. You are hearing motherfuckers' internal thoughts throughout this entire fucking movie. And when it does it, it just like shows the person sitting there staring intently at something. And it's usually because someone's asked them a question and they're waiting to answer it. And you just see them. And periodically it'll show some other person's face and they're kind of doing the same thing. Just sitting there looking like, what the fuck? What's taking so long to answer this question? What is going on here? What's that noise? Who's talking? Really, they hit you over the fucking head with exposition in these internal monologues. But even then, a lot of it is pretty out there and convoluted as well. So just because you're getting this internal exposition monologue thing going on the whole time does not mean you're gonna be that much more informed. I will say though, as a whole, everyone's performances are equally over the top and hammy, with the exception of one, Kenneth McMillan's Baron Harkonnen. This performance is so fucking over the top insane. It's like he came in from an entirely different fucking movie. He spends the vast majority of his screen time screaming and ranting for no fucking reason at all. It really seems like the part was meant to be played by Sam Kinison, because that's who he sounds like half the time, just running around screaming non-stop. Ow, 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 ow! Just like that. That's what the fuck this character sounds like. He just goes around floating, spinning all over the fucking place, screaming like Sam Kinison. And it's really fucking odd, because the book character was nothing like that. But, you know, whatever. Once again, David Lynch. Guys, at the end of the day, Dune 1984 is okay. It's got a hell of a lot of shortcomings, but it's got some really cool aspects to it as well. If you can roll with the overly convoluted story and the hammy-ass acting, then I think that the sheer scope and grandness of the whole thing will entertain. It's not perfect, and David Lynch definitely would not have been my first choice to direct a Dune movie. But one thing I will say it is entertaining. It's fucking out there a lot of the time, but it is entertaining. And even though it's not perfect, Dune 1984 is absolutely worth streaming.
Across the street.
This is an entertaining movie, but it's almost like it's a companion piece to the book, because you almost need the knowledge of the book to understand everything that's going on sometimes. And even then, still, it's David Lynch. Take that as you will. So there it is, guys, my review of Dune 1984. If you enjoyed and want more content like this, hit that subscribe button and help my little channel grow. If you liked what I had to say, give me a like. If not, let me know in the comments below why. And as always, stay sexy, Arrakis.
Do not show the slightest pity or mercy. Emperor, we come for you.
If you think this movie's weird, consider this. When they offered David Lynch Dune, he had also been offered to direct, wait for it, The Return of the Jedi. Obviously, he chose to go with Dune, but let's stop for a moment and think if there's an alternate timeline where David Lynch directed Return of the Jedi. Just think about that for a minute. I'm not going to speculate on what that movie would have been like, but just on your own, think about it. David Lynch's Return of the Jedi. I am not a big David Lynch fan, but I kind of want to see that shit. If nothing else, there's already a whole bunch of midgets in the movie, so he's got that part covered.